Imagine spending 6 years convincing the world you've finally found the place where you truly belong, only to watch that belief begin to unravel in a matter of days. That is exactly what happened this week. For the first time since leaving the royal family, the one story that carried the Sussexes through their post-royal life no longer feels as secure as it once did. From the very beginning, the entire Sussex narrative rested on one central idea. Britain turned its back on them. America embraced them. Their departure wasn't an ending, it was the beginning of freedom. It was a compelling story, and its strength came from how simple it was. Viewers only had to accept one basic premise. A couple mistreated by a rigid institution had found a new home in a country willing to value them for who they really were. For years, that message resonated because so many Americans believed both parts of it. Now, reports suggest Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are already looking for ways around these so-called new Mexican rules. Because, as many critics argue, the original exit was never likely to remain permanent if it failed to generate enough income. That has led to claims of a new understanding with the British royal family, with Alison Boshoff reporting that the Sussexes have accepted a fresh set of respectful guidelines. But that's only part of the story. What truly shifted this week was something much bigger. The American side of their carefully built narrative suffered a blow unlike anything we've seen in the past 6 years. And what makes it so significant is that it came from a place very few people expected. To understand why this matters, we first have to look at what actually changed. Headlines claiming America is tired of them have appeared countless times over the years. Most of them fade almost as quickly as they arrive. This time feels different. The change seems more specific, more deeply rooted, and far less likely to disappear with the next news cycle. You can see it everywhere. The tone in comment sections has shifted. Opinion polls paint a different picture. Even late-night hosts, many of whom have historically treated Harry and Meghan with noticeable sympathy, now sound far less enthusiastic than they once did. What makes this especially revealing is who that frustration is coming from. It isn't mainly conservative commentators or committed royal supporters in America, many of whom opposed the Sussexes' departure from the very beginning regardless of how events unfolded. Instead, a significant portion of the criticism is coming from the very audience that once defended them most passionately. These were the viewers who applauded the Oprah interview. They stood by the couple through the difficult early years after leaving royal life. Time after time, they gave Harry and Meghan the benefit of the doubt, even as others became increasingly skeptical. Now, those same supporters are saying something very different. Reports discussing Harry and Meghan allegedly breaking the Sandringham Agreement and arguments that Queen Elizabeth II would never have accepted the behavior now being seen have become part of a much broader conversation. The dominant feeling isn't outrage, it's exhaustion. That single word appears again and again across articles, opinion pieces, and thousands of online comments. The criticism that surfaces most consistently centers on one contradiction. Harry and Meghan have repeatedly said in interview after interview that what they wanted most from stepping away was genuine privacy. Yet over the past 6 years, they have continued sharing deeply personal aspects of their lives through a constant stream of projects, with barely any meaningful break between them. Then came more uncertainty surrounding Meghan's reported plans for the Invictus Games. One week, Harry was supposedly bringing Meghan and the children. A few days later, reports claimed they would be staying in a royal residence. William was reportedly unhappy. Kate completed the Three Peaks Challenge, then suddenly the story shifted again, with suggestions that Meghan, and perhaps even the children, might not attend after all. The entire situation became increasingly chaotic. Meanwhile, there was the Netflix documentary. Before that, the Spotify podcast, which eventually came to a quiet end. Then came the memoir, filled with highly detailed accounts of private conversations. Lifestyle brand launches followed one after another with very little pause. More and more people began asking the same question. If the goal was to escape constant public attention, why does the spotlight never seem to disappear? But the moment that truly pushed this beyond ordinary content fatigue into something closer to sustained public backlash wasn't simply another Netflix release or another podcast discussion. It was Invictus, and that deserves to be viewed separately rather than being lumped together with everything else. Critics argue the Sussexes were never really able to follow these new guidelines and never intended to. As Taz has already argued while dismantling what she calls this entire Mexican arrangement, it still doesn't have quite the same ring to it. The bigger issue lies elsewhere, because this is where everything changed. For years, even people who questioned almost every decision Harry made after leaving the royal family would pause when the conversation turned to Invictus. Whatever opinions they held about the interviews, the memoir, or the growing list of commercial ventures, many still acknowledged one undeniable achievement. Harry had created something meaningful for wounded veterans, a competition that offered men and women recovering from life-changing service injuries a renewed sense of purpose and a platform unlike anything that existed before. That accomplishment became his strongest defense. For years, that accomplishment set Harry apart. It was the one thing that separated him from celebrities simply turning their personal lives into streaming content. Invictus gave him credibility that couldn't easily be dismissed, yet critics now argue that Brexit, or rather, Megxit, was never likely to sustain itself without generating significant income. That has fueled reports of a new arrangement with the British royal family, with Alison Boshoff claiming the Sussexes have agreed to a series of respectful guidelines while in the UK, helping pave the way for the king's willingness to reconnect with them. But the protection Invictus once provided is rapidly disappearing. That may sound dramatic, but when you look at the scale and nature of the reactions surrounding the most recent games, it's difficult to call it anything else. Military families and veteran organizations, many of whom have long defended Harry because of what Invictus meant to wounded service members, are now becoming some of his most outspoken critics. And once you examine what has actually dominated the headlines, the reason becomes surprisingly clear. The public conversation no longer seems centered on the veterans. Instead, it increasingly revolves around Harry and Meghan. "This is the part I don't understand," one commentator said. "You wanted nothing to do with the royal family, but now you come back, whether it's to visit your father or for other reasons. So why should taxpayers fund your security? You don't like this country. You don't like the royal family. You said you didn't want to be here." That frustration reflects a broader shift. Recent headlines connected to the games have focused far more on Meghan's outfits, Harry's ongoing legal battle over security, and questions about whether Netflix camera crews are capturing the footage they need than on the athletes themselves. At the same time, reports have circulated, detailed enough and repeated widely enough to spark genuine anger rather than casual skepticism, that many wounded veterans have been paying their own travel and accommodation expenses just to compete, while the event's royal patron arrives on a private jet and stays in luxury accommodations throughout the games. As those reports spread, more voices across veteran forums and social media have begun demanding full financial transparency, calling for the games' books to be opened for public scrutiny instead of remaining as opaque as critics claim they have been. But that's only part of the story. There are now organized calls within sections of the veteran community urging a boycott of the games unless Harry steps away from his role as patron altogether. Think about how extraordinary that reversal is. The very achievement that once shielded Harry from nearly every criticism after leaving royal life has, in a remarkably short period, become the source of some of the most damaging headlines of his post-royal career. For anyone who has followed this story from the beginning, that's an astonishing change. "Everyone is entitled to their opinion," one commentator said while responding to Sharon Miller. "But my position on Harry and Meghan has never changed. If you disagree with something, you have every right to walk away from it. What doesn't make sense is landing 8 hours later and signing a $15 million Spotify deal that largely revolves around criticizing the very institution you said you wanted to leave behind." Another voice quickly agreed. "And for me," they added, "that's where this story ultimately ends." If Hollywood Today is bringing you the story behind the story, hitting the like button helps keep this channel going. Do that, then stay with me, because what happens surrounding Harry's latest trip to the UK becomes even more unexpected from here. Most major news outlets framed Harry's recent visit to Britain in a simple and sympathetic way. A son returning across the Atlantic to spend time with his ailing father. Reports even suggested the grandchildren would be part of the visit, presenting it as an opportunity for reconciliation before that chance disappeared forever. But people familiar with the planning describe something far less emotional. According to those accounts, the trip revolved around a carefully coordinated effort focused on one demand above all else: full-time, taxpayer-funded armed police protection. This is the same level of security Harry relinquished when he stepped down as a working royal, and one British court has already ruled, clearly and publicly, that he is not entitled to receive it as a private citizen. When that request was reportedly rejected once again, the visit quickly unraveled into public confusion. Soon afterward, the explanation offered to the media was that Britain had become too dangerous to bring the children. But the moment you compare that explanation with the known facts, the picture becomes much more complicated. At the very time that claim was being shared through sympathetic media outlets, Harry and Meghan were vacationing in Portugal without anything close to the same level of visible security. And this is the same family that has traveled to Nigeria, Colombia, and even visited Ukraine during an active war, each trip taking place with far less public discussion about security than what is now being demanded for a visit to London. The contrast has left many observers asking a question that still hasn't been fully answered. London is one of the most heavily monitored and heavily policed capital cities in the Western world. Yet somehow, it was being portrayed as the one place too dangerous for a simple family visit to take place. People noticed that contradiction almost immediately once the facts were placed side by side, and for many, it significantly weakened whatever sympathy the security argument had managed to build over the previous weeks. To a growing number of observers, this no longer looked like a father acting solely out of concern for his children's safety. Instead, it appeared to some as though the possibility of a visit with the grandchildren was being held in front of a grandfather battling a serious illness, creating pressure in hopes of securing a different government security decision. Then, when that outcome failed to materialize, the visit itself seemed to disappear, leaving many with the impression that it had become a consequence of that refusal. But what happened next drew even stronger reactions. Then came Althorp. And I believe this may have been the single development that caused the greatest cumulative damage this week because it touched something many people felt should have remained completely beyond any commercial consideration. Althorp is the ancestral home of the Spencer family. It was Princess Diana's childhood home, and since 1997, it has also been her final resting place. For nearly 3 decades, her family has carefully preserved that place as a private space where her memory could be honored away from the relentless attention of the public. A visit there by her own son should represent one of the most personal and protected moments in this entire story. It's difficult to imagine any healthy family narrative in which such a visit becomes intertwined with media planning or commercial strategy. Yet reports emerged this week claiming that a camera crew had been expected to accompany the visit as part of a new documentary, reportedly being produced to coincide with the 30th anniversary of Diana's death. The truth was far more unsettling for many people once they considered what that could mean. The idea that a son visiting his mother's grave might be filmed, carefully edited, and eventually released as licensed content on a major streaming platform sparked something much stronger than ordinary criticism. The reaction was immediate. Across social media, the response quickly escalated into genuine anger, and unlike many online controversies, this one showed signs of lasting beyond a single news cycle. The contrast was impossible for critics to ignore. Harry has repeatedly explained, both in interviews and in his memoir, that one of the main reasons he left Britain was to protect his family from becoming media content created by others. Now, many were accusing him of doing something strikingly similar with the memory of his own mother on the anniversary that arguably carries more personal significance than any other date in his life. That only intensified when attention turned to Earl Spencer, Diana's brother, who has spent decades protecting both Althorp and the privacy surrounding her resting place, reportedly refused to allow any camera crews onto the estate for this visit. That decision immediately raised a question many people have been asking ever since. If the visit couldn't be filmed, would it still happen in exactly the same way? Or had some form of filming always been part of the original plan until Spencer's refusal forced those plans to change? If Hollywood today is bringing you the story behind the story instead of simply repeating the headlines everyone else is covering, hitting the like button helps this channel reach viewers looking for that deeper perspective. Do that, then stay with me, because the story surrounding Harry's UK visit becomes even more surprising, and there's a much broader royal backdrop that much of this week's coverage barely mentioned. While these events dominated headlines and fueled fresh debate across both sides of the Atlantic, the rest of the royal family was quietly navigating an unusually significant week of its own. That wider context matters because Harry's story isn't unfolding in isolation. It's happening alongside a series of important developments inside the monarchy itself. King Charles made a subtle but historic adjustment to one of his oldest titles. The traditional title, Defender of the Faith, which has been associated with the English monarchy since the reign of Henry VIII, was quietly reshaped toward a more openly multi-faith interpretation designed to reflect Britain's increasingly diverse religious landscape. The change happened with very little public discussion beforehand. Although the reaction remained relatively limited, it prompted a noticeable protest outside Windsor from those who believed a constitutional tradition of that importance deserved broader public debate before any changes were introduced. On its own, it may seem like a relatively small story, but placed alongside everything else unfolding this week, it contributed to the growing sense that the monarchy was making several significant decisions in quick succession, and doing so with remarkably little public attention. At the same time, Prince Andrew found himself generating another uncomfortable round of headlines after being photographed apparently trying to stay out of sight behind bushes during a horse trial, adding yet another unexpected chapter to an already eventful week for the royal family. It was a relatively small incident, almost darkly humorous on the surface. But beneath that moment was a reminder the palace would almost certainly have preferred to avoid. Years after the scandal that brought Prince Andrew's public role to an end, his situation remains an unresolved issue for the monarchy, one that refuses to fade completely and continues to resurface whenever the news cycle allows. Away from the royal family itself, Britain was also dealing with a period of considerable political turbulence. Parliament entered another phase of instability, the kind that can quickly reshape who holds influence and who no longer does. That matters for another reason. Reports have suggested Harry's ongoing campaign over security has relied not only on legal avenues, but also on support from politically sympathetic figures behind the scenes. If changes in government alter those relationships, any momentum built through political channels could disappear, forcing that effort to begin again with an entirely new group of decision-makers. That would introduce yet another layer of uncertainty into a situation that already has plenty of it. Throughout all of this, King Charles has remained noticeably quiet. He has largely avoided commenting on the continuing Sussex controversy, the discussions surrounding his revised royal title, and the latest headlines involving Prince Andrew. But silence, even when intentional, comes at a cost. More and more people, including many who have traditionally admired Charles's calm and measured approach, are beginning to question whether restraint has now gone too far. Critics have become increasingly direct in recent weeks. Many argue that Queen Elizabeth II, whose reputation for protecting the institution was built over decades, would likely have dealt with these situations much earlier. In their view, she would have stripped problematic titles rather than allowing issues involving Andrew or Harry to linger for years, returning again and again in fresh waves of damaging headlines without any lasting resolution. William, however, appears to be taking a very different approach. He has said little publicly, but according to those close to the Prince of Wales, his actions speak far more clearly than any statement could. Sources describe a door that has been shut deliberately and completely. No private meetings are reportedly being arranged. No active efforts toward reconciliation are said to be underway. And regardless of how circumstances may change in the months ahead, Harry is reportedly being given no access to William's children. This is where everything changes. Those familiar with William's thinking suggest he isn't reacting to one visit, one disagreement, or one difficult headline. Instead, he's making decisions with the long term in mind. His 3 children are growing up. They're forming their own understanding of family, trust, and relationships. William is said to have little interest in exposing them to an environment where private conversations, family disagreements, and even moments involving children have repeatedly become material for books, documentaries, interviews, and other commercial projects. Whatever opening King Charles may still leave available, driven by a father's understandable hope of preserving some relationship with his son while there is still time, William is believed to have closed from his side. Some sources go even further, describing that door as not simply closed, but effectively barricaded. And it's worth remembering something that often gets overlooked. William isn't only acting as Harry's brother, he is the future king. One day, the authority to make these decisions won't simply be personal, it will be institutional. The position he establishes during this period of tension could very well become the blueprint for how the monarchy manages its relationship with the Sussexes throughout his reign, once those decisions belong entirely to him rather than to his father. That is one reason this week feels different from so many controversies that have come before. The available paths forward appear to be narrowing from several directions at once. In America, the audience that once provided the cultural support making the Sussex story so commercially successful is showing signs of something deeper than temporary frustration. What once looked like ordinary news cycle fatigue increasingly resembles lasting exhaustion. Back in Britain, the message has become equally clear. Through court rulings, palace decisions, and now, according to reports, even Earl Spencer's position regarding Althorp, the signals all point in the same direction. There is little appetite for reopening the relationship under the same conditions that have existed in recent years. Then there is the veteran community. For a long time, it remained the one audience that consistently defended Harry because Invictus represented something many believed had been built through genuine commitment rather than commercial opportunity. Now, that support appears to be changing. In growing numbers, and with an intensity not previously seen, critics within parts of that community are openly organizing against Harry's continued association with the games. At the same time, the royal family itself appears to have steadily reinforced the one barrier that may matter most: the increasingly limited relationship between Harry and King Charles, the only remaining connection that once seemed capable of offering a realistic path towards some form of family reconciliation. Despite everything that unfolded at Althorp this week, and despite reports that Earl Spencer refused permission for any filming on the estate, the documentary centered on Princess Diana is still reportedly moving forward, with its release planned around the 30th anniversary of her death. That means whatever happens next is already set in motion. Whether Harry, the production team, Earl Spencer, or even the public feels prepared for what comes next may no longer matter. The project is reportedly still on schedule, and sooner or later, viewers will see how it chooses to present these events and the controversies already surrounding them. But when I look back on everything that happened this week, I keep returning to one thought more than any single headline. There is one version of this story where several genuinely difficult realities collide at the same time. A complicated security dispute intersects with a father facing serious health challenges. A son wants what he believes is proper protection for his family. A father hopes to spend precious time with his son and grandchildren. The palace, the government, and the courts all face limitations that prevent an easy solution. Viewed through that lens, nobody is entirely right or entirely wrong. It's a deeply human situation, messy and imperfect, and I suspect there's real truth in that interpretation. But that's only one side of the story. There is another version. In that version, the security disagreement becomes a negotiating tool rather than simply a safety concern. A grandfather's declining health becomes something that creates leverage instead of only heartbreak. A mother's gravesite risks becoming a location for a documentary until public criticism forces a change in direction. And nearly every intensely private family moment passes through the same commercial framework that has defined so many Sussex projects over the past 6 years. That interpretation is much harder to view sympathetically. And when you look at everything that surfaced this week, the contrast with the Portugal trip, the reports involving cameras at Althorp, and the timing of the upcoming documentary, it becomes easier to understand why so many people find that reading increasingly convincing. The truth, of course, may not sit entirely on either side. It may be that both versions contain elements of reality. Depending on which moment you examine, genuine concern and genuine strategic thinking can exist at the same time. That's often how real families work, whether they're royal or not. Love, frustration, calculation, and good intentions aren't always separate. Sometimes they exist together inside the very same decision, making situations far more complicated than simple heroes and villains narratives ever allow. What made this week feel so different was the way so many separate events appeared to reinforce one another. The security dispute, the Portugal trip, the reports surrounding Althorp. Taken individually, each might have been easier to explain. Together, they created a pattern that many people found difficult to ignore, making the more strategic interpretation seem increasingly persuasive, especially to those who have followed this story closely from the beginning. So now I'd like to hear your perspective. Do you think this backlash in America has real staying power? Or will it fade like so many previous controversies once the news cycle moves on? What about Invictus? Can its association with Harry recover from what happened this week, or has something fundamentally changed this time? And when it comes to the security dispute, where do you stand? Do you believe the more sympathetic explanation, the more strategic one? Or do you think the truth lies somewhere between the two? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one of them, and your feedback genuinely helps shape what we cover next. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do, and I'll see you in the next video.